You're listening to Retro Reels, a show that looks back on films from time gone by and recalls the various events, trends, and perspectives that informed their creation. I'm your host, Hanna Belinsky, here to guide you through a trip to the past via the silver screen. Before finally wrapping up with Kurosawa, I wanted to watch his 1961 film Yojimbo, which in Japanese means bodyguard. The story was inspired by hard-boiled novels, in particular the novels of Dashiell Hammett, who is commonly regarded as one of the best mystery writers and probably the best writer of hard-boiled detective fiction. Kurosawa cited inspiration from a 1942 film adaptation of Hammett's novel The Glass Key, although the overall plot of Yojimbo is more similar to the book Red Harvest, which also saw a lone outsider manipulating rival gangs to his advantage. What Kurosawa came up with is at once reminiscent of American westerns, gangster flicks, and traditional jidaigeki, or period film, along with an element of dark, satirical humor that I didn't expect at all, but that really enhanced the whole viewing experience for me. The result is a really entertaining, modern-feeling film, and the nameless samurai, played by none other than Toshiro Mifune, is instantly memorable. Mifune's portrayal of the samurai, 2-bit, as he's jokingly referred to, is one of the most defining performances of his career, and it became a prototype for the anti-hero as we know it today. Rather than playing the typical noble, courtly samurai, he plays him as a cynical, instinct-driven loner who operates outside of the traditional codes of honor. Mifune incorporated his characteristic, animal-like movements, the way he scratches and twitches, with a simultaneously bored yet alert kind of attitude. In fights, he makes the killing look easy, like it's something he does just for fun, and never at any point does he move in a way that seems frantic or without purpose. He has this slow, swaggering walk that contrasts with how quickly and violently he moves when it's time to fight. Crucially, Mifune avoided the typical stoic hero persona. His Ronin is a lot more than that. He portrays himself as someone who surveys the evil deeds of others with a bemused smirk, but hidden beneath that veneer of disinterest, you eventually see a glimmer of compassion that gives his character some much-needed depth. It's a formula that is very familiar now, particularly in neo-noir protagonists. The guy who looks like he doesn't care, but he kinda secretly does. At least enough to clean up a mess he had nothing to do with. Maybe he gets a reward, maybe he doesn't. More often, though, he does it just for the love of the game. There was another important face I recognized in this film, my first time seeing him in a villain role, and that was the face of Tatsuya Nakadai, who, to my shock, died of pneumonia just a little earlier this month at the age of 92. Over the course of Retro Reels, I've watched Nakadai in Kwaidan, in A Woman Ascends the Stairs, and in what was perhaps his most notable performance as the doomed warlord and Japanese analog for King Lear in Kurosawa's 1985 film Ran. This guy really had range because he was able to make me hate him in Yojimbo, playing this sniveling, dishonorable coward of a character who's never anywhere without his pathetic little gun. So rest in peace to a truly important Japanese actor who had the kind of star power, versatility, and prolific filmography that only legends do. I guess I would say he's kind of like the Robert De Niro of Japanese cinema, in that he's been in a ton of stuff and he can do it all. Although I couldn't get Masuro Sato's very distinctive soundtrack for Yojimbo for this episode, the film and the jazziness of its music reminded me a lot of an anime I enjoy called Samurai Champloo, which, come to think of it, takes a lot of inspiration from Yojimbo. So I'm gonna play a bit of music from that show to set the mood. production for Yojimbo took place on a specially constructed set at Toho Studios, where the entire town was built from scratch to embody a dusty, decaying world reflective of the moral rot that's so central to the story. As is typical of him, Kurosawa insisted on a weathered realism, using long streets, leaning buildings, and swirling dust to heighten tension and atmosphere. Cinematographer Kazuo Miyagawa incorporated low-angle compositions, long lens shots that compressed space, and sweeping camera movements. The film follows a wandering ronin. He never reveals what his name is, but calls himself Sanjuro, or 30-year-old, who arrives at a desolate town that is being torn apart by rival criminal factions. The once peaceful settlement has fallen under the control of two competing bosses, Seibei, a sake merchant whose gang dominates by force, and Ushitora, his ambitious former lieutenant, who broke away to form his own syndicate. Their feud has escalated to the point where the townspeople live in constant fear, businesses are shuttered, and bodies routinely appear in the streets. Except for the very annoying town crier who wanders into the street to let people know when it's high noon or to make other announcements, it seems like a ghost town. Sanjuro decides he can profit from this chaos, or at least manipulate it such that the town can be rid of both factions. Since the gang's power stems from their use of hired swords, he presents himself to each side as a masterless samurai, available for employment as a bodyguard. To prove his fighting prowess, he immediately and effortlessly dispatches a few gang members. His skills, combined with his fearless demeanor, quickly impress both bosses, who then attempt to outbid one another for his services. Sanjuro's strategy is to pit the gangs against each other, feeding each side misinformation, secretly sabotaging their plans, and provoking conflict whenever negotiations between them seem close to reconciliation. And his manipulations begin to work. Distrust grows, alliances fracture, and violence erupts in increasingly destructive ways. While Sanjuro remains outwardly detached, his sympathies clearly lie with the town's innocent residents, in particular, a young farmer's wife who has been held captive by Ushitora's men. He decides to free her and reunite the family, even though doing so exposes him to danger. It's not long before Ushitora's brother and henchman, Unosuke, who always carries a pistol and is the only one who has doubted Sanjuro from the start, susses out what really happened and imprisons him. Ushitora's gang brutally tortures Sanjuro, leaving him on the brink of death. He only narrowly escapes and recuperates with the help of the town's coffin maker and a guy named Ganji, the izakaya owner, two of the few normal residents who have been hanging out with Sanjuro since he first rolled into town. Sanjuro spends some time healing up in a nearby temple, but returns to confront the last of the criminals head-on when he learns that Ganji, who has been delivering food and medicine to him, has been captured by them. In a climactic showdown, he faces all of Ushitora's men, including Unosuke, the low-down piece of trash who brings a gun to a sword fight. But, against all odds, Sanjuro's skill and tactical cunning allow him to eliminate the entire gang. Of course, it's not like we ever doubted him, but it's still pretty satisfying to see it go down. With both crime lords defeated and the townspeople finally liberated, Sanjuro hits the road again. Yojimbo was critically and commercially successful, both at home and abroad, netting a nomination for Academy Award for Best Costume Design and the Volpi Cup for Best Actor for Toshiro Mifune at the 22nd Venice Film Festival. The movie's influence, especially on American cinema, is extensive, and it has inspired a lot of remakes and retellings, one of which ripped off the film so blatantly and without crediting Kurosawa that I can't not talk a little bit about it. While I wrote up my notes on Yojimbo, I threw on Sergio Leone's 1964 film A Fistful of Dollars to watch while I was at it. Why? Because Leone straight up stole Kurosawa's story and tried to pass it off as his own. The only meaningful superficial difference between this movie and Yojimbo is, instead of being set in feudal Japan and focused on a nameless samurai, A Fistful of Dollars is set during the Wild West era, in a frontier town on the border between the United States and Mexico, and the wandering Ronin is, naturally, a cowboy. The extent of the ripoff, from the story to the characters, even specific scenes, is such that Kurosawa and Toho Studios actually filed a lawsuit against Leone. And probably because he knew he would have lost, the case never went to court, with Leone settling in Kurosawa's favor. Kurosawa ended up with 15% of the film's profits, in addition to exclusive distribution rights for Leone's film in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. He later joked that he made more money from Leone's copy of his movie than he ever did from Yojimbo itself. I went into watching this thinking, well, there's no way this movie will be more fun to watch than Yojimbo was. But you know what? Clint Eastwood makes a pretty good anti-hero. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult to upstage Toshiro Mifune, but it's also difficult to really compare the two, because although they're both playing a similar type of guy, the cultural context is completely different, and Eastwood did a pretty good job of anglicizing the taciturn samurai. I had as much fun watching him in his very first leading role, the lesser-known first part of Leone's trilogy that ends with the more widely known film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, as I did watching Mifune. It's the authenticity with which they play this part that makes them so successful. They are convincing tough guys, and the tough guy can be a difficult role to sell. If you fail at it, you can really make a fool of yourself, especially since it relies so heavily on delivering a cool turn of phrase, just so. These guys are not sex symbols. They are handsome, to be sure, but they're men's men, paragons of masculinity, unafraid of danger, of death, too tough to appear to care, and yet quietly beholden to justice, to his sense of loyalty, to protecting the weak. Both films feature this really great final standoff. One guy versus the many crooked guys, who wins despite being outnumbered with the help of a little trick up his sleeve. I personally think the way Sanjuro disabled Unosuke's gun-wielding arm by throwing a kitchen knife was a lot cooler than Eastwood wearing a secret metal breastplate under his poncho so that he could withstand gunfire. But I guess when you can't pit swords against guns, then you have to find some other way to raise the stakes. One thing that A Fistful of Dollars lacks that Yojimbo had in spades was that relentless streak of humor. Yojimbo was funny enough that at a few points I actually laughed out loud. One scene in particular that I remember was when one of Ushitora's gang members came to Gonji's tavern, sporting this ridiculously exaggerated mean mug. I mean, he was obviously trying to look tough and intimidating, so he was scowling and baring his teeth. But all it did was make him look like a demented rat. And he slowly approaches and stares Sanjuro down, just for Sanjuro to say something to the effect of, can I help you? There's also this really great one-liner at the end of the film where, when the town crier, who had been pestering Sanjuro the entire time he'd been in town, approaches him one last time, Sanjuro says, "Kozu, go kill yourself." Fistful of Dollars doesn't have that going for it, though. It leans a lot more into melodrama and theatrics, with extreme close-ups of characters' eyes and corny crash zooms. Eastwood is a much more typical anti-hero, reserved and emotionally detached, without that feral quality that Mifune always has, but that's a trademark of Mifune's acting anyway, and not something that just anybody could or should attempt to copy. Perhaps the most important way the movies differ is that Yojimbo offers a critique of corruption, greed, and the collapse of social order, while Fistful is, unsurprisingly, a lot more American in its preoccupations with things like individualism, opportunism, and the mythologizing of a single mysterious man. Honestly, though, neither film is particularly deep, at least not compared to some of Kurosawa's other works, and it doesn't need to be deep. The extended meditation on morality that you see in Rashomon and Seven Samurai is secondary or even tertiary in Yojimbo. The entertainment value takes the lead here. I think out of all of Kurosawa's works, this is probably the one I would recommend to a first-time viewer, and that's only because Ran's runtime is simply too long, and I think it would scare people away. In short, I'd say Rashomon and Seven Samurai are important, but Yojimbo is the most fun. That's all I have for you guys today. I'm Hanna Belinsky. Thank you for tuning in to Retro Reels, and I hope you'll join me again next time on another look back on the way things were.